Let's keep things rolling, folks, with another amazing talk. And this one promises to be super useful to you, especially if you have heard about GraphQL but are unsure how to introduce it into your application architectures. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, any friends from beyond the binary, allow me to introduce your next speaker of the 2021 CityJS conference. It is Shruti from San Francisco in the USA. Shruti is a senior software engineer with PayPal, and in this talk, Shruti is going to be looking at GraphQL, and more specifically, going to be exploring how PayPal introduced this technology into their existing enterprise application architecture. This one is sure to be filled with some amazing tips if you have yet to implement GraphQL in your working practices. Keep your questions to one side and join us for the Q&A session, which will start straight after this talk. The comments rolling in on YouTube or wherever you are watching along at home, as well as keep posting along on social media using the hashtag CityJS2021. Without further ado, Shruti, it is my pleasure to hand the stage over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming to my talk. Today, I'm going to be talking about getting started with GraphQL in an enterprise. So the outline for today's topic is who's using GraphQL. I'll talk about what is GraphQL briefly. I'll talk about why is GraphQL so popular and why should you care about it in an enterprise. And then I'll dive in briefly into the story of our enterprise, which is PayPal adopting GraphQL, the lessons we learned, the mistakes we did, the best practices we adopted along the way, and if you are interested, how you can get started. I'll first start with an introduction. My name is Shruti Kapoor. I am a senior software engineer at PayPal, and I've been working with GraphQL for over 3 years now. At PayPal, I work a lot with REST APIs and GraphQL APIs and migrating GraphQL REST API into a GraphQL API. So I have a lot of stories to share. You can find me on Twitter at Shruti Kapoor08. You can also find me on Twitch at Shruti Kapoor. I also share JavaScript and GraphQL tips through my newsletter, which you can find on bit.ly/Shruti newsletter. I will be sharing a brief summary of today's talk in my newsletter today. So if you're interested, you can sign up at Shruti newsletter. So before I get into the technical topics, I want to briefly take a minute to address, to share a little bit of personal story. So I know we've been all going through this really hard time over the last 1 year. Been living in pandemic, and we're doing virtual conferences like this. And for me, it has been. I know for everybody else, it's been really hard. Like I really miss seeing people. I really miss hanging out with coworkers, hanging out at a coffee shop, and just like working through my side projects. And I noticed like over the last few months, I was feeling really low on motivation. I didn't want to work on any side projects. I didn't want to write any blog articles. And I was really missing that human interaction, hanging out with people, getting my work done. So I wanted to create a space where we could all hang out and do our side projects together. And so that's why I started the Twitch live streaming session where basically I just share any side project that I'm working on and I invite people to come and work on their side project together. We stay, I share my screen and we keep each other motivated. It's a really fun way of like just getting some work done in a Pomodoro focus session. It's a 45-minute session. So if you're interested in hanging out, in doing your side project, in working on something cool, you can come and hang out on twitch.tv/Shruti Kapoor. And I invite you to bring your side project and work along with me. Um, and if this was happening pre-pandemic time, we would be giving away swag. And that's actually one of the things that I used to miss going to conferences. I used to like love hopping around on booths and like getting the swags and t-shirts and socks. And I know we're in virtual time, so I thought that it would be fun to do a giveaway. So I'm doing a giveaway of Eloquent JavaScript book, which is actually my favorite book on JavaScript. Whether you are a new JavaScript engineer or whether you've been working with JavaScript for a long time, I feel like you will definitely find something useful from this book. And I have partnered up with No Starch Press to give away this book. So basically, all you have to do is you can take a screenshot of any of the slides of today's talk, and you just have to tweet it out to me at Shruti Kapoor 08. And at the end of this talk, I will pick a random winner and give away Eloquent JavaScript to that winner. I'm super excited. All right, let's get into it. So I'm going to be talking about how to get started with GraphQL in an enterprise, and just to briefly share a story about how I started working with GraphQL at PayPal. So before coming to PayPal, I had actually never used GraphQL. Like when people would say, "What is GraphQL?" I thought it's like this graph sort of structure that Facebook made, so must be like working with that kind of graph data type. And I thought, like, I had only heard of GraphQL from Gatsby, so I thought maybe it's just like this related to Gatsby. Maybe it was developed by then. So I had no idea what GraphQL was or even like how to use them. And when I started with at PayPal, my role was to work on this internal project, and the project was actually using 5 REST APIs. At the time, most of our applications were Node.js, and they were all using REST APIs, all creating REST APIs. So my task was to consume the REST API. We were also working on a REST API in our team. So our backend engineers were already creating a new REST API. And my job as a front-end engineer was to use the newly created REST API and also existing services to create this new front-end application. State of GraphQL in 2018 was also really new, which is when I started. GraphQL was used by one other team at PayPal. We didn't have a lot of like standardized tooling across PayPal to use GraphQL. Everybody was kind of experimenting at their own time. Even outside the community, it was also picking up really slowly. There were a few open source projects. There was one big company that was working on it, but it was really slow. It was just like picking up hype at the time. But since 2018, a lot has changed. GraphQL is now being used by a lot of companies, especially big enterprises in production. As you can see here, there's Twitter and Lyft and PayPal and Starbucks and KLM and Pinterest and GitHub and Audi. There's tons of companies that are using GraphQL in production right now. A lot of open source tooling has also come out in the last 2 years. A lot of companies are working full time in developing tooling for these, such as Hasura and dgraph and Apollo. And in the last 2 years, there's also been GraphQL Foundation, which is the foundation that takes care of maintaining GraphQL specification. And there are community members like AWS and PayPal and Twitter that are part of the GraphQL Foundation space to maintain GraphQL and continue to grow GraphQL. Because GraphQL is a specification, it can be implemented in whatever language you feel. But one of the most popular languages that it is implemented in is GraphQL JS, which is the library that I'm showing here. And as you can see, there's 165 contributors, active contributors to GraphQL JS, and it's used by 437K people all over the world. So it's really picking up. It's being used widely in the industry. And according to State of JS survey, GraphQL is now the language which has the highest interest amongst developers. And a lot of developers want to start using GraphQL. So if you're interested in using GraphQL, this is a really good time to get involved. At PayPal itself, we've been using GraphQL pretty in a big scale now. There's almost 33 apps in production that are using GraphQL. We have our public API that came out that Braintree has been putting out, which is our public GraphQL API. In our internal Slack community, we have almost 500 members of GraphQL, 500 members who are interested in working in the GraphQL space. We've built out tools internally to help the adoption of GraphQL. We have GraphQL trainings internally. So even at PayPal, we are supporting the adoption of GraphQL pretty heavily. PayPal as a company is also an active member of GraphQL Foundation, and we are an active community member. We go to this contributor days, we go to speak at conferences like this, and we are helping people adopt GraphQL in the community. In the community itself, there's been a lot of tools that have come out. One of the standard tools is Express GraphQL, which is used pretty widely in spinning up a GraphQL server. And then there's big companies like Apollo and Prisma and Hasura and dgraph that are also putting great resources out based on where you are in a tech stack. One of my favorite tools is actually graphical, and if you can see here on the left side, there is like this query. So this is actually like a code tool. So on the left side, you write the code, and on the right side, you can see what data comes back. So it's kind of like an active playground for you to try out GraphQL. And I thought this was really cool. So basically, it has like a way for you to explore APIs. And if you see right here on the right hand column, there is the API Explorer. So you can see what API you're looking at, and at the same time, you can use that API and fire a request, and you'll have the data right away with you. So it's like really interactive way of communicating with the GraphQL API, and you don't have to do any integration to try out GraphQL with this graphical tool. So this is my favorite tool actually. Anybody who wants to use GraphQL, I first show them this tool, and this is automatically like a really cool way to show the power of GraphQL. There's also GraphQL editor that has come out, which is kind of like a drag and drop way of adding types and adding fields, which I really like as well when I'm building out a schema. There's also GraphQL Playground, which is again a really cool tool as well. But if you're sitting in the audience thinking, oh my God, what is this graph of Wawa? I have no idea what she's talking about. Don't worry, I got you. So here's a 101 of GraphQL. So GraphQL, as the name represents, stands for graph and QL. The graph in GraphQL represents for the type of data. So graph means that how a data field is connected to another data field. So for example, you may have a user. A user may have some fields like name and messages or notifications or things like that. So with GraphQL, you kind of think of how one data type is connected to another data type. So for example, user may have a name may be a string. So this is how you drawing a relationship. And then QL represents for how you query for that API. So GraphQL is basically a query language for APIs. In fact, even the formal definition of GraphQL is that it is a query language for APIs and a runtime for fulfilling those queries. GraphQL provides a complete and understandable description of your data in your API, and it gives the clients the power to ask for exactly what they need and nothing more, making it easier to evolve APIs over time and enables powerful developer tools. I think as a front-end developer, the part that I found most powerful in this definition was that it gives clients the power to ask for exactly what they need and nothing more. And that basically meant that the client only gets the data that they asked for. So as a front-end developer, I have to worry less about the extraneous data that may be coming back from an API. Now let's look briefly between how data communicates within REST API. So let's say that we have a REST API. Let's say we're on PayPal dashboard and we want to show a customer's account details, and then we maybe want to show notifications. So let's say that we want to show how much balance they have. So we explored our APIs. We found out that customer's account is the resource that we want to use. And it turns out that to call customer's account, we need to call 4 other APIs. We probably first need to have a token, which we'll probably get from auth endpoint. Then we need to get that ID from auth endpoint, or the token from auth endpoint, and send it over to another downstream services like customer's user ID. Then we need to use that ID and then send it over to account details as well. And then probably if you want to show notifications, we'll also have to call another resource, which is customer user ID notifications. And then what happens is that once we call auth, we get the token back, and then we can use that token to send over to other APIs, which then resolve and get us our data back. So once all the APIs have resolved, we can get our final object back. Whereas in the case of GraphQL, you have one endpoint. So you have GraphQL endpoint. And whatever you need, you have to ask from the same endpoint. And so you fire your request away and GraphQL comes back with an object back. And so you get your data back. So you only had to integrate with one endpoint. So that's the biggest difference between how to integrate with a REST API versus how to integrate with GraphQL. There's just the one endpoint. There's also graphical terminology that we'll be looking at in this talk. So I'll go over that in briefly. For example, there's 4 main things in GraphQL. There's schema, queries, mutations, and resolvers. So schema is basically a contract of everything that your API will give you back. It's an exhaustive list of what the API supports. For example, here in this example, there's a type character. So character can have only 2 fields, name and appears in, and they must always be of this data type, which is name should always be a string and appear should always be a type of episode. So schema defines exactly what the data must represent. Then we have query. Query, as the name suggests, is basically how we're going to query for the data. So for example, here we're querying for name. So we're querying for an object hero, but from hero, we're only getting name back. And so when this query fires, we only get the name field back. So you ask for name and you only get name. And then to compare it with REST, so query is similar to get, and then we have mutation, which is similar to post or delete. Then we have resolvers. So resolvers are the function that do basically all the magic that we were showing. So we have this GraphQL endpoint, and then GraphQL figures out how to give that data. So it's this function that figures out how to give that data back. GraphQL resolvers are basically the functions that resolve what data should be coming back for a field, and every field will have a resolver. Depending on which library you may be using, you may not have to write resolver for every field. So for example, here, if we have the type user, and we've got three fields, given name, family name, and addresses, it's possible that you only have to specify resolver for addresses. So we are specifying a function here, but given name and family name can be automatically given back from the library, which is GraphQL.js that you're using, since it has default resolvers. So you can make custom resolvers, but there's also default resolvers available for you. So in brief, there were three main features that of GraphQL. So GraphQL is an open source specification. It's not a language, it's a specification for implementing APIs. With GraphQL, clients have the ability to ask for exactly the data they need, no more, no less. And clients will specify the structure of data they need depending on the schema that was already established. And another cool thing about GraphQL is that there's no versioning. So let's say that you have to push a new feature out or a new field out. You add it to your GraphQL endpoint, and anybody who's integrated with the GraphQL endpoint now has access to that field. And another cool thing is that so not having versioning also introduces the problem of deprecating field, right? Because now somebody might be using it. So what you could do is you can be using deprecated attribute. And what that does is it shows whoever is integrating that this attribute, that this field is going to be deprecated in the future. So they can slowly phase it out. Another cool thing about feature of GraphQL is that because we have to establish schema in the beginning itself, because it's a contract, it allowed us to get our teams, our front end and back end teams together in the beginning and invite them to talk about what fields we need and develop schema intelligently. So no more were we just blindly sending out a REST API and expecting front end apps to integrate with it. We actually got our backend and front end teams together in the beginning of the project itself and drove what schema should be there. And because it had powerful tools to see what's exactly what schema or exactly what API was coming back, exactly what data was coming back, it became really easy to explore the data that will be coming back, and it became really easy to develop our front end applications that way. So at PayPal, when we decided to use GraphQL, we were, before starting to use GraphQL, we were thinking of the challenges that we had at the time. We were mainly exploring two main questions. How do we build apps currently at PayPal? And what is the best practice of building app? How should we be building apps? So we found out a few challenges that we were facing at the time. Our first challenge was that we were using versioned APIs all across the board. And versioned API is really good when you have a new change that you don't want previous clients to integrate with, or when you have a breaking change. But the problem is that when we had to deprecate a field, would that be a breaking change? When we send it out, how would the previous client deal with it? Should we deprecate from v4 and v5 as well, or just v5? So we were always thinking about how do we deprecate fields, how do we add new fields. And the problem was when we added a new field, we were not able to give it back or give it to the clients who already had that version. So for example, if we had to remove a field and add a field at the same time, we were either introducing breaking changes or we were not giving updates to clients who had already integrated. Another problem that we were seeing is that whenever we had to add new data, we were thinking whether we should make a new endpoint for it. But the problem with having a new endpoint is that like we saw in the previous example, if we have a new endpoint, the client or the person who's integrating has now needs to probably make a new round trip and get that data and then fire another request. So it already delays. And then another problem that we were seeing is, okay, if you don't want to add a new endpoint, can we just use query params? And the problem with query params is it's okay for one or two APIs, but as we were integrating, as we were increasing our APIs, it quickly became really messy on keeping track of query params. We were also thinking, what about if we just like send it to the existing endpoint? And then the problem we found with that is that when we send it to existing endpoints, we are now delivering all these updates to people who probably don't even need it. So we're sending all this extra data to clients who don't need it. So those were the problems we were facing with adding new data. And then we also noticed that we were actually sending too much data to our front end clients because our REST APIs were developed in independence of front end APIs. We were preemptively sending them information that may probably not need because there was no contract established. So we were probably sending them too much data, and then front end clients had to actually manage that data by using Redux or manage that state on their own side to remove the data or to match the type, to match the structure of the data that they expected. Another problem that most of our developers were facing was because we had all these resources, all these endpoints, we were spending so much time just like going through our API Explorer and finding out which endpoint to use. So after I've gotten this endpoint, what endpoint should I need to call next? So you were thinking less in terms of like how we should optimize our UI, but instead we were thinking of which endpoint I need to call next. And that's very unnatural in the way we actually develop, because as developers, we don't think of endpoint one versus endpoint two. We think of, oh, I need to show like username and I need to show their address. So now I need two fields. We think in terms of fields. We think in terms of name and address field. We don't think in terms of like, oh, name would probably go to this endpoint or address would probably go to this endpoint. That was quite unnatural. And I think that's why GraphQL came out to be really powerful for us. The features that GraphQL was offering seemed to be was a big incentive to us. So for example, it has one endpoint. So already we were saving so many round trips. We didn't have any more versioned APIs. So any of the deprecated fields we had to do, we had good instrumentation on which fields were being used. So we can deprecate fields very intelligently. And because we had established the contract in the beginning of the project itself, we were only delivering the fields that the client wanted. And as a developer, actually, when we started showing graphical and all these tools to our developer community, people were really impressed to see, because you can right away see what the GraphQL API supports, all the mutations and queries and supports, and you can right away fire requests to see what the information is coming back. And it's really interactive. So our developers were really cool, were really excited to see the graphical interface. And it helped us um, improving the collaboration between our front end and back end teams, because instead of these teams working independently, first REST API being delivered to the back end API, to the front end APIs, we actually got together in one room, even with the UX designer, and then we thought of how what fields our UX needs, our visual design needs, and created our schema, our contract from there. And then we could independently work. So once we have the contract available, once we have that schema established, we could take that contract and work independently from there. So now I'm going to talk about, if you want to adopt GraphQL, what are the approaches of adopting GraphQL in an enterprise? So there's three major approaches. The first one is to create a GraphQL wrapper over your REST API. So you may have a REST microservice. What you can do is convert that REST microservice into a GraphQL service. And so what we did was we converted all of our APIs into REST APIs, GraphQL APIs. No, I'm just kidding. I'll get to that in a minute. But the second approach is that you can convert your GraphQL API into a REST API. So basically, you build a GraphQL API but for clients that may need a REST API or that are already integrated with the REST API, you can kind of do a REST wrapper. And so this is opposite of the first point. And GitHub has done this in public. And then the third option is that your GraphQL and REST API can coexist. And basically, this is also a very commonly used approach. So basically what you do is any new microservice that comes is GraphQL, and anything that is existing is REST. So you don't have to migrate the existing services or the existing clients, but anything that's new can be GraphQL. And so at PayPal, we started using the first and the third approach, which is that the REST API was slowly being orchestrated into a GraphQL API, and any new APIs we were starting to write them in GraphQL. So we had a few options of thinking of how we want to adopt GraphQL. We thought that we could first start with small apps that are new, and small apps that are not being used in public. We could start experimenting with these APIs and convert them into GraphQL APIs. There was another strategy that we adopted, which is to build standalone GraphQL APIs. And this we adopted this for any new API, for any new API that was about to come. And then the third approach that we thought was we could orchestrate existing APIs. So we already have so many REST APIs. What we could do is when we're using like uh, 4 or 5 different REST APIs, we could or create a GraphQL layer that talks to REST APIs at the bottom. So the client actually talks to a GraphQL API, and the GraphQL does the magic of calling whichever REST API it needs to. So I'll go in a brief detail about 2 of the apps that have started using GraphQL. The first one is the checkout app, and the second one is the merchant app. We had a little bit of different approach in both of these teams. So in the checkout app, what we do is we have one GraphQL API. We've got downstream existing REST APIs as well. So what we did was we integrated with the REST APIs as is. The client sees one GraphQL API, and then we add new resolvers that are now only calling GraphQL. So REST stays as is, and then the GraphQL resolvers stay as is. The GraphQL resolvers are for the new endpoints. In merchant app, what we did was we had 4 or 5 different REST APIs that we were about to call. So the merchant app is actually an aggregate of GraphQL APIs and REST APIs. And depending on which endpoint you call, you may be either calling a GraphQL API or you may be calling a REST API. So the first thing we did when we were adopting GraphQL was we selected a first app. And this is the project that I was working on. So this was actually a new internal tool. And our goal for this tool was that we wanted to deliver less code. So we didn't want to add anything that was not needed. We wanted to keep the data that we are sending very small. We didn't want to send any extra data. So even though we were making REST APIs, we wanted to make sure that the data that we were sending was super small. And we didn't want to send any extraneous library. So we didn't want to use Redux if we didn't have to. We wanted to keep the data that we were sending to our client very small. And during our research, we found that GraphQL works really well as an orchestration layer. And so that's the power we leveraged. So what we did was we created a new REST API, but we wrapped that REST API as a GraphQL API. So then our REST API and GraphQL API was being built in parallel. We also had existing REST services that we orchestrated as well. So we created a mix of GraphQL endpoints and REST endpoints, but GraphQL endpoint would in turn be calling multiple different REST endpoints at the bottom. And so the client, because they're integrated with the GraphQL endpoint, they see the benefits of the GraphQL, so they get less data. But at the back end, we don't have to completely re-implement all of our microservices, all of our downstream services. So what we ended up doing was we had this new REST API that we were consuming. So we ended up we ended up orchestrating that REST API as a GraphQL API, and then we integrated our other existing REST APIs as is. And the reason we wanted to convert that into GraphQL API is because it helped us only deliver the data that we needed. And because we were delivering less data, we were able to get away from Redux, and we were able to just use React State Management Library to take care of our state management needs. So we were not shipping any external libraries that we didn't need. And what GraphQL helped us to do was it helped us establish a schema contract in the beginning, and UI came as a first thought. So because we've got our UX designers and our front-end designers and our back-end engineers in the team, we were able to look at the visual design and say, this is the field that we need. So this is the field that's going to go in our schema, and that's the field that REST should give us back. So we're able to shave off extra data already from our new REST API that we were building. And so we did our GraphQL API and our REST APIs in parallel, the new REST API. So currently we're adopting GraphQL in a lot of different teams. we have like this fragmented approach. So we have multiple GraphQL endpoints at PayPal. All the teams are kind of building their GraphQL endpoints independently, but we are also moving to a unified GraphQL approach throughout the team, throughout the company. Braintree has already had a unified API that's in public, and PayPal is also moving to this unified API approach, which is basically that teams don't have to independently work on their GraphQL endpoints. There can be one GraphQL endpoint that the clients integrate with, that all the teams have to integrate with. So in short, GraphQL helped our two main goals, which was of performance and developer productivity. We were able to increase our performance because we were sending less data. The type of the data that the clients were requesting was the type of data that we were sending back. So clients didn't have to do any extra work of matching the pattern or do any cleanup of data. We increase our developer productivity because our developers now can only think in terms of fields, and they don't have to look at multiple different APIs that they have to explore. They can write a mutation and they can fire that mutation right away from Playground or Graphical. And this helped in increasing the explorability of our APIs. And because we had powerful instrumentation on exactly what fields were being used, it really helped us in either adding more fields to our APIs or deprecating the fields that we don't need. So because we have field level instrumentation with GraphQL, we were able to see whether a field was being used or not. And if it was being used, we would add a deprecated attribute, and then it would indicate to the clients that this field is going to go away. And so with the help of instrumentation, we were able to intelligently phase a field out. So when we started introducing GraphQL, there was a lot of questions that our engineers asked us. And some of these questions, some of the questions they asked are here. People asked us if we need like a graph type database for GraphQL. And I think this is a very common question people have, whether you need a graph type database for GraphQL. So you don't need a graph type database. Your current database works fine. There are multiple libraries that help you convert or help you speak to your database from GraphQL itself. So you're actually using GraphQL to talk to the database itself, but you don't need a graph type database. The graph in the GraphQL represents the type of data and the connections between fields. Another question people had was from the name was if GraphQL is similar to SQL, but it's not. GraphQL is a way for querying for data from an API. Because GraphQL is so popular in front end, people thought that GraphQL is only built for JavaScript developers, but GraphQL is a specification, or it can be built in any language. A lot of people thought that because all of our downstream services are in REST, we'll have to convert all of those services into REST. But actually, you can pick and choose whichever service you want to convert into REST. You don't have to convert all of your services into REST. You can either create your new service into REST, or you can orchestrate a REST service, or you can just have a completely independent GraphQL service. This was a common question from people who were using authorization, which is that they have sensitive data. And there are a lot of attributes, that custom attributes that you can build as well to hide the data that you don't need. So you can actually use auth tokens as well to have authentication and authorization. It's not built in currently in GraphQL, but there are attributes that you can use to custom do that, even using your existing auth APIs. Another question people had was if I can limit what APIs are exposed, and same thing, authorization and authentication will help you do this. And people had questioned that GraphQL doesn't support auth. That's true that GraphQL doesn't support auth, but whatever APIs you currently have for your authorizations would still work with GraphQL. So I know I'm just out of time, so I'm going to quickly go through this. Some of the lessons that we learned from this was the most important thing I think that we did was we picked our first app, and this was kind of like a playground app where we could experiment. So for you, if you're adopting GraphQL, pick a small app, pick a first app, the app that doesn't have a lot of traffic right now, something that is low stake, and start converting that into GraphQL and see what, if it benefits you and what are the challenges that you faced. We built our schema together, which is how our teams collaborated, and that was really powerful for our adoption. We orchestrated the APIs wherever we could not build from ground up, and that was really powerful because we had so many different REST APIs, so many different downstream REST APIs. A very powerful lesson that we learned was not to do a one-to-one mapping, which is what we ended up doing as a mistake as well in our new first app. We did a one-to-one mapping of the new REST API and GraphQL REST API, and so we were unable to reap most of the benefits that GraphQL gives from REST APIs. So don't do a one-to-one mapping, because then you're just wasting resources. You're just wasting time building a GraphQL layer. Um, so use built-in GraphQL features, and GraphQL gives you this type safety for free and required fields for free. And as a JavaScript developer, it was really useful because I didn't have to worry about string types or data types anymore. So use the built-in GraphQL features. Although this comes with a caution, um, GraphQL will only be as fast as your slowest endpoint. GraphQL is not a magic. So if your REST API is really slow, your GraphQL endpoint will be really slow as well. So maybe you have to first think of how you're going to improve the performance of your slowest endpoint instead of converting everything to GraphQL and just expecting that things would be fast. There are still a lot of challenges of GraphQL, and because it is being developed, it's still pretty new. There are a lot of challenges that are being worked on. So, for example, caching and error mapping are not built very well yet. There are a lot of companies working on it, but we ended up making our own error mapping at PayPal. If you have a public API, you need to know what schema you're going to be sending upfront. And this is a big problem because for public APIs, you don't really know what your client will be asking. So building public API is a little bit of challenge still, but GitHub has been able to do that. So that's a good example to look at. And same way, when you have multiple different teams working on GraphQL, making that one graph approach becomes really complicated. So you have a lot of things you have to think about, like schema stitching and conflicts and who owns what. There are a lot of libraries that can help with schema stitching and making unified APIs, such as Apollo Federation and Hasura. So those are good libraries to look at if you're thinking of making a one graph. So next steps for you, if you're interested in adopting GraphQL, is to assess what are the current challenges that you're facing in your team. Who are your developers and consumers? Do you have anything that is specific for you? So for example, your authorization, your error mapping, your instrumentation, and where is that going to fit? And start having a conversation with your front-end developers and your architects and your back-end developers and try to get the engineers on board. Um, so do a little bit of exercise, similar exercise in your team where you pick a small app, something that's low stake, and try out GraphQL there. Think about what challenges you have and whether GraphQL would be a good solution for you. Set a standards team that can help you with schema stitching and making tools, and leverage the open source libraries that are out there in the community. I think one of the biggest thing about GraphQL is the open source work that has been put into it. So leverage what's out there in the open source world. And if you want to sell it to your team, here are some things you can sell on. For us, the biggest thing was collaboration between the front end developers and the back end developers and UX designers. And that helped us already shave off the data that we were going to be sending off. So that was a big win for us. Tooling is awesome in GraphQL. So if you want to sell it to your team, show them the tools that are out there. And people will be really excited to see tools like Graphical and Playground. It helped us increase the dev productivity. And I think that would be a good selling point for you as well. Think about how you're going to incrementally adopt. And a big selling feature is that you don't have to convert everything or like take down everything all at once. You can incrementally convert things to GraphQL, because there are no versions. So you can push updates right away and you can deprecate fields intelligently. It's similar, the data that comes back is similar to JSON. So it's easy to understand what kind of data you're sending back, and get architects and domain experts on board. So you're not the only one who's advocating for GraphQL. So you have your domain experts who can also vouch for the advantages that it gives. To wrap up, I would say that GraphQL is here to stay. It's actually one of the most popular technologies out there, and a lot of people are interested in adopting it. So if you're interested in GraphQL, this is a really good time to start adopting it. And I would also say that no API is perfect. GraphQL has its disadvantages and advantages, just like REST API does. But GraphQL is being adopted by a lot of different companies like PayPal and Facebook and Twitter and AWS and Intuit. And join groups that are in the community, join open source projects that use the open source projects that are out in the community. The biggest advantage that I found of GraphQL is the community that powers it. So leverage the community. We also wrote a blog post. Mark Stewart from our team wrote a blog post on our success story of using GraphQL. So I would definitely recommend checking that out. There's also great examples of companies that have written blog posts on their success stories. So for example, Expedia has written one. Mark from GitHub has written a book. Those are really good resources to check out as well. Lastly, here are the Twitter. I will be sharing the stock slides on my Twitter as well. Here are the social links you can use to follow me. All the slides will be available on my GitHub link as well. And before I leave, I want to give one last dev joke. Thank you so much, everybody. You've been great.
Shruti, thank you very much for that very interesting talk about implementing GraphQL at an enterprise scale. It's always interesting to see how scale affects how we use these kind of technologies. If you enjoyed that talk, or even if you didn't, please do join me in giving Shruti a huge round the world round of applause. Our Q&A with Shruti will be starting any moment now over on GatherTown, so please do join us there. And if you are not on GatherTown, let us know if you're going to be implementing GraphQL in your enterprise scale applications on Twitter using the hashtag CityJS2021, as well as keep the comments rolling in on YouTube. That's pretty much all we've got time for today, so we'll see you back here tomorrow morning or afternoon or evening, depending on where you are, for day 3 of the 2021 CityJS online conference. See you later.